Rajat, California recently passed a new minimum wage for restaurants. You read the reports, talk to restaurant owners. They're laying off people, they're cutting hours, they're shutting restaurants. The law is having a negative impact on the QSR, fast casual industry in California. What impact is that minimum wage law having on your business?
First of all, thanks for having me on, Grayson. I appreciate it. I'm excited to have this conversation. Yeah, it's been really interesting. So, when we talk to food operators, whether they're in a restaurant or a food truck or even food manufacturing, I think the message is kind of the same, right? Like these laws obviously really hurt them. There's already an industry where there's really kind of thin margins. And it's already really hard to hire. And what they're saying is, yes, this is going to make it a little bit easier to hire, but if they can't really make any money, then they can go out of business, right? And so I think a lot of our partners are kind of thinking about alternatives. One thing that is interesting, and this is kind of like a counter to this, is that they have found that even if they increase wages, the amount of people they can hire is only marginally going up. It's not like if you like increase wages to whatever minimum wage, you double the labor force. They actually find it still really hard to hire because it's really hot, it's really cold. Some of these environments are refrigerated, right? So that's an interesting thing, right? Which is like, on one hand, it's like, okay, like this is really harmful for our business. We might not be able to survive because of it. So the razor thin margins. On the other hand, it's like, even if we do this, we actually cannot kind of get the people we need. In either case, I think autonomy and automation is kind of necessary, is what they're telling us.
Autonomy and automation necessary. They're, in my opinion, they're going to need it to survive in their businesses. How much of do you think that this is culturally driven, where the younger generation doesn't want to take that entry level job? I'll be very blunt and rude. They feel that they're entitled and they don't have to start at the bottom and work their way up.
Yeah, I think there's something to that, right? Like, the prior generations are getting older, they're getting out of the workforce, right? There's also kind of a smaller set of immigrant labor, I would say, right now, and yes, I mean, I think the younger generations want better work. I would actually say, in some regards, that's good, right? I mean, I think it's like, as a humanity, as a people, we should strive so that, like, people can do better and better work every generation. So I think that's good, and I think the goal would be that yes, the automation, robots, and AI can kind of do some of the work that maybe people don't love. I mean, again, nobody wants to scoop food in a cold or hot kitchen 8 hours a day. I mean, it's just not a great job, right? And instead, perhaps they can become robot operators. Maybe they can, do other tasks and jobs that are more amenable to people.
Because I want to give you some data here. You're right. We need the robots. We need the automation. And I'm going to cite the U.S. Bureau of Labor statistics here. Roughly 2.5 million job openings are projected each year in the restaurant packaging industry, with a 300% labor turnover on average. 300% labor turnover. That's astronomical. That's only going to increase cost without automation filling this in. Without, let's call them aspirational. These younger individuals wanting aspirational jobs, better paying jobs. Maybe they want to go into retail or some various other aspect, and not necessarily food packaging or food. Without automation, would the restaurant packaging industry even survive?
A lot of people are talking about this, right? So a lot of our customers are thinking that this kind of lack of labor basically is an existential threat. I've talked to multiple people, and they've used that term, which is existential threat. We might not survive in 5 to 10 years if this continues. So much so that many of these companies and brands are actually thinking about, hey, can we offshore production? And of course, you can't offshore everything, right? There's certain things that you just got to keep on shore. But you can offshore parts of your supply chain to really ensure that you actually can access the labor. I mean, and of course, as we've seen with COVID and other crises in the last few years internationally, I think depending on other countries for something so fundamental as food is not a good idea. So I think one of the things that our partners have found interesting is, hey, like, we'd like to keep our production on shore. We'd like to increase the availability of labor in the form of robots. And again, our goal is not to fire anybody, right? Like, there's literally not enough people, right? So we need everything we can get.
We need everything we can get. The labor is going to be there. You're going to have individuals that are going to oversee it, individuals that can do quality control. I believe, and I'll say this until I'm blue in the face, that automation is going to create jobs. There'll be different jobs. There'll be more exciting jobs. There'll be digital jobs. Perhaps that individual didn't want to chop a hamburger or chop a steak or gut a cow. We'll do a digital app to do that. That's exciting. That's interesting. Obviously, there's a lot changing from the packaging side, the slaughterhouse side, the restaurant side. Automation is going across all those facets. Where does chef fit into this picture?
Yeah. So what we found is, we said, okay, look, the biggest kind of problem we can solve in the food industry is really working on this labor shortage, right? That Bureau for Labor Statistics quote you called out. So then we kind of went around and we kind of really talked to customers. We talked to everyone from food truck operators to fast casuals to ghost kitchens, stadiums, universities, K through 12, manufacturers, basically anyone and anybody and everybody we could talk to, are like, okay, what kind of problems you're facing? They kind of echoed this anecdotally, right? The labor shortage. And we kind of asked them, okay, like what task should we help you with? Let's say we could help you with any task you want us to do, whether that's cutting food or washing food or cooking it or assembling it or QA even. What should we help you with? And basically everyone we talked to said the biggest pain point they face is really around this kind of assembly operation or this plating operation, which is kind of the final part of making food, which is essentially it's what you see at Chipotle or Subway or Kava or Dig In, right? It's this act of taking a pan of food, right? So you have a pan of whatever, rice or beans or what have you. And the operator needs to kind of scoop into it and get the right portion size and not be kind of too low, not damage the ingredient, not spill the ingredient, and place it into the right part of a burrito or sandwich or wrap or whatever that might be, a tray. It seems very simple, by the way. It seems like a very trivial operation. And for humans it is, because of course we have insane amounts of intelligence. But we actually found that this is the operation that's actually 60 to 70% of labor for these companies. And again, that scales from like fast casuals to food manufacturing. Assembly or plating is another word, is 60 to 70% of the labor. So they said, hey, look, like, yeah, down the line, we'd love you to do everything. But for now, you should focus on the assembly portion, because that's really where we find the bottlenecks for the labor shortage. That's where we really have the biggest bang for your buck when it comes to helping us overcome this shortage.
If you look at packaging, plating, to me, the grab and go comes into play with the QSR. You see them at airports, you see them at stadiums. I could see your technology being deployed at a stadium, let's say 60,000 people. If you're Taylor Swift, you have 100,000 people, and perhaps it's some dish that was made there, and you could run this whole operation that you could feed 100,000 people. And let's just do simple math, say 20,000 want to eat that pure plated, or you could put it at sporting stadiums. Do you see that type of operation when you're looking at large scale events, running your system for plating operations to ensure that those fans can be fed in a timely manner and they don't get cranky waiting in a long line?
One way to think about this is that, if our goal as a company is to really put a AI-enabled robot in every commercial kitchen, right? And non-fine dining, I'll say. Fine dining, I think, is going to stay human-led for quite a while. So now the question is, okay, how do we get there, right? And at the very beginning of the company, we actually thought about, okay, let's go directly to fast casuals, right? So let's go to these Chipotles and the likes. What we actually ran into is really like a data and AI problem, which is, if you think about a Chipotle, I mean, like maybe I use that example or Sweetgreen or something else like that. You have one person who's kind of doing every single ingredient on the line. It's not like an assembly line where Sally's doing station one, Sally's doing the leafy greens. No, she's walking your tray down the line. What does that mean? Well, Sally has to manipulate every single ingredient on the line. And if I can't do I as a robot, if I can't do every ingredient on the line, then I don't have a one-to-one equivalent, right? So we said, okay, well, we need to get data on how to manipulate 80, 90 ingredients. But how do we get that data? It's not like you can just download that data on the internet. There's no like robot action pairs of how to do food manipulation on the internet. You can't download it. So basically what we realized is the way to get data is you have to deploy robots. But how do we deploy robots? These like Sweetgreen and fast casual chains won't let us deploy anything unless we can do all the ingredients. So we ran into this chicken egg problem. So then we kind of went back to the drawing board and we're like, okay, look, our vision and mission is to deploy a robot into every commercial kitchen. And we really would like to get to that stadium example. We'd like to get to the prison. We'd like to get to the fast casual, the ghost kitchen. But it feels like we're trying to kind of, maybe I use two different analogies. It seems like we're trying to like build the Model 3 right away in the Tesla analogy, or we're trying to build level 5 autonomy in the autonomous vehicle analogy from day one. Is there a market where we could build a Roadster, or in another analogy, build level 2 autonomy, get something to production? If we get something to production, then we get real production data. If we get real production data, then we can make our models of how to do food manipulation better. And over time, we can get to the vision of having a robot do fast casuals and things like that. So that's actually when we discovered manufacturing. So today we're actually really focused on food manufacturing, which are things like prepared meals. So, if you think about, the salads you might find at the grocery store, like Trader Joe's salads, or you might think about like frozen prepared meals you might find at the grocery store or at Starbucks, or, yogurt parfaits or party trays or sandwiches that you find in cafes, et cetera. These are all made in kind of central production facilities. What's really nice about these, though, is that because the volume is so much higher, right? You're making 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 trays a day sometimes. What does that mean? Well, now it is an assembly line, right? Sally's on a conveyor belt. She's doing station one. Sally's doing the rice, and Bob's doing the meats, and Joe's doing the sauce, etc. So now I don't have to automate 80 ingredients to add value. I can automate 5 ingredients to add value. And if I can get 5 ingredients onboarded to the chef system, I can ship something to production. If I ship something to production, I get production data. Over time, my AI gets better, and I scale within manufacturing. And I see how to manipulate food. I see how to manipulate, sweet potatoes and a very thick, mashed potatoes. And I see how to manipulate all these ingredients and be consistent and not spill them and all these things we've talked about. And over time, as we get our autonomy flywheel going, we can go from level 2 to level 3 to level 4 to level 5. And for us, level 5 would kind of be going back to the fast casual analogy, which is extremely low volume and very high mix, if you will.
How do you teach your system if it's not to bruise the food of an avocado versus picking up a nut? How do you teach the system those various different nuances that humans naturally know when it comes to different types of food?
So there's kind of 2 phases of the company on how to do that. So the first phase of the company is we basically what a lot of the autonomy companies did, right? Even self-driving cars is a great example. Is basically they had like machine learning rules. So a good example might be, okay, well, if you see a car in front of you and it stopped, then you should stop. That's a rule. You detect that it stopped and then you stop, right? So it's a rule. So we had rules similar to this for a chef. For example, we could change the pressure and the flow of our gripper. And you can say, okay, well, I want this pressure and I want this flow. And we design certain utensils as well on the hardware side to prevent damaging the material. Industry term, there's a lot of people use that word material, right? And I think that's kind of how we did it, right? Like you basically have like an applications engineer, technician who comes up with like, okay, I need to manipulate bananas. Okay, great. Okay, well, let's write a config. That config is going to be 200 software parameters of how do you manipulate that so it's consistent, so it doesn't damage it, what compartment you want to place it to, et cetera. And you test and you iterate on the config. And once you have the config, you have the config, right? You don't have to reinvent the wheel next time you see it. So that's kind of the first phase of the company. Now, of course, what we're doing is kind of transition more to like an end-to-end system, right? So you say, okay, well, now you have image data and you also have kind of robot action data. Okay, now let's have more of an end-to-end system that says, okay, well, let's detect that it's a banana. Okay, well, like this is how I'm going to behave so as to kind of not damage it and be consistent and not spill it, etc.
Now, is this a permanent installation, or I just, for some reason, what Wolfgang Puck does at the Oscars, he does this giant assembly line, all the ingredients. Could you eventually make it a portable system? It's not portable today, where you can take it to one of these large-scale events, install it for the evening, take it back. Where's that going?
I think it just kind of goes on the roadmap, right? So today, right, Chef is a system that, it is actually quite mobile. It's on casters, wheels, essentially. So you can kind of but it's on assembly line, right? It's in a manufacturing assembly line. So it's basically the same footprint as a human. We designed it that way on purpose. You can kind of slide it onto an assembly line, do what it needs to do, and then you can take it to a different line. So our customers might move it from line to line 7 to 8 times per day. So that's already the way it is. It's not bolted to the ground or anything, right? Now, kind of the next phase would be kind of going to ghost kitchens, fast casuals. Even in those cases, though, there's like one make line, right? In a fast casual or a ghost kitchen, you probably still don't bolt it to the ground, but you have kind of leveling feet so it doesn't move around all the time, and kind of leave it there. I think down the line, yes. I mean, we'd like to make it a very small system. You can kind of slide in and out of put it into a truck, take your event and go. I think the portability is actually not the hard part, I would say. The hard part is actually probably the volume, right? So today our customers are making, some of our customers are making 50,000 meals a day, right? With our robots. Down the line for fast casuals, they might be making 500 meals a day, 1,000 meals a day, right? With an event, I mean, surely some events are thousands, tens of thousands, as you called out, but others might be hundreds. And I think with hundreds, I mean, the level of dexterity you need just increases because more and more orders become custom and stuff. So it's basically a volume versus mix question. Mix as in product mix. That's kind of how we think about that equation.
50,000 meals a day is impressive. If you take that customer there, how large can they scale that? Is there a capacity limiting them scaling that of what your system can do, or is that just the current volume that customer is doing today?
That's the current volume. It's not really a chef capacity. It's really that customer, for example, is a contract manufacturer. So this is interesting. A lot of the grocery stores, so if you think about whatever grocery stores you use, they oftentimes don't make their own meals. So you obviously see the deli meals at the deli section, right? The prepared salads and stuff like that. Oftentimes those are actually made by a contract manufacturer. And these contract manufacturers might work with 5 or 6 different chains, and they'll kind of make all the meals. And some of them focus on frozen, some of them focus on fresh, some of them do both. But really then they are kind of our customers most of them are B2B businesses. They sell to other B2C businesses. And they're in the business of getting more and more of these grocers or cafes or companies like Starbucks on board, basically.
So then the only thing limiting you, this is just a hypothetical, essentially it's the size of the warehouse from the volume throughput. Is that this is the footprint on the ground that would limit it?
One way we think about it is like basically how many stations there are in assembly in a plant, which is directly the thing that limits is really the size of their business, right? Which is limited by how much demand there is for food. So I mean, one of the things that's really nice about Chef is that everyone on the planet, of course, needs food, and basically like they go to these for prepared part at least prepared meals. They'll go to these CMs, contract manufacturers. And these contract manufacturers might have 2 lines, they might have 40 lines. It depends on the size of the CM. And each line might have 30 stations. Again, it differs by the size of the line. Some lines might have 10, some lines might have 30 stations. So a 30 station line might mean, okay, let's put 30 robots there. One of the things that's nice about Chef is that we can partially automate an operation. So what I mean by that is like, let's just use a simple example, 10 station line. So what a 10 station line might mean is like you can have 10 people putting 10 separate components into a meal, right? So one person's putting down a tray, one person's putting down the rice, one person's putting down whatever, you get the point. So you can imagine starting a customer of ours starting with 6 robots. Let's just get started, get 6 robots deployed. Okay, great. They spend 6 months with the first 6 robots, make sure they feel really good about it, and then they order robots to automate the rest of their line and then also the rest of their plant. So I think it's really the number of stations that they have, which is correlated by the amount of volume they do.
What's the most common prepackaged meal? Is it salads? Is it frozen pizzas? What is the most common food?
I think I actually don't have a good macro answer for you. I think I would imagine it's pizzas. Here's what's interesting about pizzas, actually. It's a really interesting thing. So, we talked about that mix and volume question. The thing with pizzas is that there's not that many SKUs, different products. Cheese pizza and pepperoni pizza, there's like 10. And maybe there's sometimes more, but you get the point. So if you have 10 SKUs, what you can do is you can have lines that just run cheese pizza. This line just has cheese pizza. This line just has pepperoni pizza. And at that point, you can get a custom piece of machinery, basically. It's not robots, just a machine that just does cheese pizza. That's kind of the low mix automation that's been popular for the last 100 years, right? I mean, if you go to a car factory, like the Ford factory, the Tesla factory, what have you, it's that same analogy. It's you have the Model 3 line, you have the Model S line, etc. So you can get a robot that just does the same thing over and over again. It's not thinking. It's a hard-coded robot that just does the same thing over and over again. That same thing is true in this pizza example. So basically, if your volume is insanely high, tens of millions a year or months sometimes, right, depending on the customer, and your mix, the number of different SKUs you have is low, you can get custom lines that just do the same thing. So that's kind of a solved problem, I would say, right? Where we come in is, if you have let's say more of a prepared meal, a salad, you have more like 60 to 70 different SKUs, right? But you're not going to get 60 to 70 dedicated lines. That's going to be too much. You're just not going to utilize all those lines. So you're going to have like 12 flexible lines. That's where autonomy is necessary, because you're going to change over the lines. So in our world, like the high mix world, I would say like it's really kind of like the bread and butter, like frozen meals, right? It's like Indian butter chicken, and it's like things like that are extremely common. Like a lot of people want that.
Are there limitations to the type of foods and packaging that your system can work with today?
So the thing about food, here's the thing that like it's not obvious because we're human again. The thing about food is like if I let's just take like an ingredient. And I'm kind of giving you the high level story, and we'll talk about examples. But let's just take an example. Like let's take an onion, and instead of like chopping it into like little chopped bits, I like chop it into rings. Well, that's a very different material. There's different physics, different ways of manipulating it. Now, and of course that analogy, scales, right? So if I have 1/4 inch cuts versus 1/2 inch cuts versus 1/3 inch cuts, it's all different materials basically. Now, if I like saute it versus broil it versus room temp, it's again a different material. And if I saute for 2 minutes, it's different than 10 minutes. And if I then after cooking it, if I put it in the fridge, that's different than freezing it. That's different in room temp. And then based on how I grow it, it's different. You get the analogy. The thing with food is that it's extremely like incredibly kind of highly dimensional. And the way you cut and cooked some food yesterday it's basically never going to repeat itself ever in history, right? Just too different. So I think that's where we find difficulty more generally. Now for particular instances, there are particular foods that are like complex, because where we really kind of have found our bread and butter is what we consider like scoopable food. So if you go to like any of these kind of kitchens, what you find is that like 95% of the material is scoopable. So like what do I mean by that? You can basically take an ice cream scoop or like a disher, a spoon, something like that. And that's kind of what you see at Chipotle, right? Like I'm using Chipotle as an example, but that kind of analogy scales even beyond that. So that's kind of our bread and butter. Within that, there's certain instances of materials that are extremely bulky. So imagine you want to pick up like 5 cherry tomatoes, right? These are like relatively big, items. And it's not like you can just scoop, because if you scoop it, you might get one piece too much or one piece too little, and now you're not consistent, right? It's kind of like a bin picking problem, but it's not even like you're picking one chicken breast or one whatever iPhone. It's picking 5 cherry tomatoes or 4 pieces of shrimp or whatever, right? So I think those counting items are complex. But basically outside of that, like I think chefs more generally fairly good at doing everything else. And we work, of course, really hard to get there.
Do you use computer vision to count, or how are you counting and the portion size is correct?
Yeah, it's all computer vision based. So we have like a bunch of different cameras, and like the majority of our team is actually kind of computer vision, robotics, motion planning team. It's actually very similar to the autonomous vehicle stack, and most of our team's from AV actually. So yeah, I mean, I think from the CV side, there's kind of like a few broad strokes problems we think about. So problem number one is figuring out, okay, well, I have a topography in my hotel pan of food, right? A hotel pan is kind of like standard pans you might see at a fast casual or also food manufacturing plant. So where in that pan do I pick from to be consistent? And of course, like as you're eating into the pan, there's hills and valleys, and you have to pick higher or lower, and there's different topographies, right? So that's kind of broad strokes problem number one. And what you're optimizing for is the right portion size and the right consistency around that portion size. Standard deviation, basically, right? And maybe one other thing is bias, like how much above the mean are you, right? So you can have a very, very good tight standard deviation, but you could be like 30 grams above the target weight. So that's not good either. So that's kind of goal number one. Goal number two is, of course, now that you've kind of picked, can you actually place in the right place? So you kind of have trays or wraps or sandwiches, what have you, moving down a conveyor belt, and you need to detect and track those and place into the right part of those trays. Now, so that in and of itself does not seem too hard, right? It's a simple detection tracking problem. Now, what makes it a lot more complex is the noise around that. So there's a ton of people on your right or your left, right, that are kind of interacting with the trays before chef and after chef. So there's a lot of noise. The conveyor signal is kind of being dialed up and down by a line manager who's like, hey, you got to go faster. Sometimes they go too fast. So you have your speed estimation is kind of all wavy, and it's not actually much as clean as you might think. So there's a lot of noise in the signal. Sometimes the conveyor is vibrating, right? And the conveyor started off flat, like flush against the robot, and now it's skewed. And these conveyors are often like sloped actually to like water drainage. So there's all this kind of like noise that actually makes it really hard to productionize. Like getting a prototype, trivial, but getting something production grade that's robust to deal with all these edge cases, that's really where we find a lot of pain. The second part of it, of course, is like, okay, how do you make it scalable? Because let's say you can get it to work in one facility, great. Now you go to a different plant and like, instead of a 1-lane conveyor, they have 2 lanes. In other words, 2 lanes of food going down the same conveyor belt. Okay, well now you have to detect 2 lanes and not let that interfere with the first lane. Sometimes it's a kind of a stop and go conveyor. It's like stops and goes, stops and goes. So that's a different CV model. Sometimes, it's cleated and it's indexed. There's all these different kind of like variations. And, our goal from the placement side is we don't want to have a custom models or custom software really, or hardware, of course, per conveyor. Rather, we just want to be able to slide the chef robot onto the line. That's it. Right. And it uses a camera right above the conveyor to understand what's going on. And that's it. It's kind of like a human does it. You don't have different models for humans. It just slides onto the line and they're good to go.
How much of a concern or a priority is consistency? And I ask because there was a report that came out from an investment bank. The name of the bank slips me, about Chipotle, where these analysts went from different Chipotles, and the consistency was wildly inconsistent. And even it had an impact on Chipotle stock. It forced the CEO of Chipotle to come out and say, we will fix things. We will make it consistent, telling the restaurant owner operators, you have to fix that. How important is consistency to your customers?
It's actually insanely important. It's actually arguably one of the most important things for our customers. There's a few different kind of parts to this, right? Part number one is kind of unhappy customers, right? So, customer doesn't get the beef they were supposed to get, or what especially proteins. Proteins are the ones that people really care about, right? They're really upset. So I think, and then they'll churn, right? So that's like lost lost LTV for the customer, right? So that's kind of part one. Part two of it is, all of our customers basically have some target weight, okay, for the entire meal. It's like, okay, I want this meal to be 5 ounces, whatever that might be. And they are really judged, first of all, from a regulation perspective, right, from USDA, FDA, but also from their customers and their retailers' customers, right, the end customer, about did they get that, right? So nobody wants to have a 5 ounce written label, but it's actually 4.5 ounces. So what does that mean? That means that because the corporate people at these our customers are really concerned about this, they kind of trickle that down to the line managers on the production line floor, and then the production line managers always kind of essentially nudge their people to overfill. So we really don't want to be under, so we'd rather put over. Okay, great. That sounds great in theory, but the problem is then that these customers have 50% of their cost of goods sold, and for 40 to 50 is the raw material. So if you're kind of giving away food, which is the industry term, giveaway, then you're losing a ton more money than you need to. So oftentimes when we have a conversation on ROI with our customers, we find that this giveaway calculation actually kind of is arguably one of the top ones, which is, hey, we're just going to help you save money by not giving away so much food, and hopefully help you prevent customers from churning, which is really important for them too.
You're helping them on a variety of factors. You're enabling them to scale, and obviously you're enabling them to scale in an economic way. And they're not going to have to deal with the ups and downs of the labor issues. Obviously, you run a business. Your technology is not cheap to develop. You look at restaurants, CapEx, if you're going to buy a Viking stove or various commercial kitchens, it's very expensive to outfit a commercial kitchen. What is the chef business model?
Yeah, so we have a bit of a different business model than most of our partners are actually used to, but they actually like our business model a little bit more, which is interesting, which is robotics as a service. So most times when you get automation, you go to a systems integrator and they say, okay, well, it's going to be $2 million, $1 million, whatever, right? And then, these firms have pretty good debt lines, and they kind of get equipment financing or some kind of debt to kind of purchase that equipment and pay back over time, right? Our model is a little bit different, which is we say, look, we're not going to charge you really much at all up front. We're going to charge you a small deployment fee to actually ship the robots, kind of like for our applications deployment engineers to essentially like come out and deploy the thing in the flights and hotels and stuff like that. But that's minimal, right? And at that point, really, it's going to be a recurring yearly fee you're going to pay for the cost of Chef. And that cost is going to be kind of less than, of course, the cost of your people, of course. And what's nice about this, there's a few things that are very nice about this for the partners. First of all, they don't have to pay a huge amount of CapEx, which is great, right? It's kind of like it's kind of like the ROI is kind of relatively instant. It's not like you have to wait years to generate an ROI. Like first year, you're generating an ROI, which is really nice. Another thing that's very nice is you basically don't have to like create budget, right? It's like, and that's good for them and for us, right? Which is like the budget is basically your payroll. Now, again, there's nobody being let go. It's just that you already have budget allocated because you're going to hire somebody, right? So it's like you don't need to create budget, and that's really nice. Another thing that's I think really nice for our partners because of this is that it kind of like shows them that we're going to, and we do the work to make sure the product and the service gets better, right? So we ship them software updates, hardware updates, AI updates. And from time to time, like if there's really a notable hardware update, we'll do that too. So let's just say NVIDIA comes up with a great new GPU, and that GPU is going to allow us to really be able to manipulate the ingredients in a more consistent way, for example, right? We have more compute, we can make better decisions. Then great, let's do it, right? Because that's going to ultimately allow our customers to succeed. And if they succeed, they're going to hopefully scale with us as well. So we also benefit, and they benefit too.
You eliminate the obsolete hardware problem. Obviously, if you get a really great stove, commercial, runs on gas, you got to run on gas, it's not going to go out of style, it's not going to go bad. But you're sitting here and you're saying, well, we're going to bring this new automation technology, and don't worry, we're going to guarantee, or we're going to contractually obligate ourselves to constantly update the hardware for you. You're eliminating one of the potential risks of going there. Is that one of the big selling purposes outside of all the economic benefits, that they're not going to have to worry about, oh, I bought a Chef system 6 months later, wah, wah. Is that one of the big selling points?
It definitely is, right? So like, I mean, an automation, like, well, so here's what's interesting, right? So the automation of old, it did not change that much, right? A dispenser is a dispenser is a dispenser, and it will dispense sauce for you. Done. But the automation of new AI-driven automation is changing every single day, right? We have new AI models coming out. We have new GPUs coming out, new CPUs coming out, new robot arms coming out. Everything's new cameras. Everything's getting better, literally like every single day. So for this kind of automation, I think our partners without this would be concerned. But I think we kind of say, look, partner, like we're like, our initial starter pack might be 6 robots. And it's like, look, we're not trying to scale to 6 robots with you. We're trying to automate your entire facilities, not only this facility, but also your other 10 facilities. That's hundreds of robots, but you're not going to do that unless we kind of constantly provide you the cutting edge and keep you really happy. So yes, we're going to try to keep you with the kind of fully upgraded line all the time. And that's been a really nice selling point as well.
Is there a volume fee, or is this all you can produce? Do they have to worry about any other additional fees that come along with the yearly fee?
We try to make it very simple. So it's kind of that yearly fee, and that's kind of it, right? It's kind of a one-time thing, and there's no other kind of fee associated, basically. Try to make it very simple for them. Again, that's very different from traditional automation, right? So if you have traditional automation, there's always these kind of like random fees that you see, right? It's like, oh, my equipment broke down, and you have to get somebody last minute to come in, and they're going to charge you a ton of money and last minute fees. So we just say, look, this is the yearly fee. It's a partnership. That's it.
So to me, there's trust. You look at the whole big thing on the vehicle side and the truck side of automation is building trust with the public. But on your side, it's building trust with the owner operators, the business owner. So you're building the trust, you're eliminating the CapEx, turning it into an OpEx, and they could build that into their cash flow. You're in the field today with several customers. What results are they seeing since they've deployed Chef into their operations?
It's been really great, actually. So we've seen a bunch of great results so far. I'll name a few. So one of our partners actually, and the biggest thing we really aim for is really increased capacity. So one of our partners, by deploying these kind of robots, have seen increasing capacity by 20%, which, by the way, I mean, they're making a ton of volume. So if we can just help them make more revenue, basically that's what that means, right? More revenue. That's a huge deal. I mean, that's kind of the number one ROI, which is basically this labor shortage and just increasing volume point, right? So that's kind of part one. Part two is really the giveaway part. So usually we find that, humans have anywhere from 6 to 7% giveaway. Chef can kind of get that down to really anything you want. We literally have sensors and software that can guarantee it. So we can get like 0.1% giveaway above the target. We can get 0 too, but most of our partners still want to prefer a little bit above the target. So, I mean, again, that's millions of dollars of savings over a year. So I think kind of increasing capacity giveaway is something we've seen. We often seen that we can increase throughput. And I think throughput is there's kind of two parts to this. Part one is that sometimes humans are just slow. Not always, but sometimes humans are just slow. We can just go faster, just point blank. So that's part one. That's not always true, by the way. Sometimes humans are quite efficient, right? And in those cases, we can increase the average throughput. And the reason we can do that is that humans kind of like, if you look at the graph of their throughput, it's like, it kind of like hems and haws. And why is that? Well, they get tired. I mean, it's like 6 hours of scooping food in a 34-degree Fahrenheit room. They just get tired. Well, robots really don't get tired, right? So it's kind of like a metronome. You can just kind of go. So you just go you pick a number, you just go. And your average throughput goes up. So we've seen average throughput go up. And then maybe the final thing I'll call out is really, of course, allowing those people, the people who are doing the assembly in the past, to kind of do another task. So we've seen those people become robot operators. We've seen them do continuous improvement. We've seen our customers set up a second line, a third line, because they now have people to run that line. So these are the things we kind of like strive for and have seen.
Look at an increased capacity of 20%. You're limiting, I call it spillage. You're eliminating spillage for all practical purposes. Look at the economic benefits there, astronomical, especially if you multiply your system across multiple sites, multiple commercial applications. How do your customers initially find you? Why do they come to you? Is it based on labor? And then when they really understand how the economics works and they deploy, like, oh, wow, okay, this thing's selling itself. But how do they initially come to you, and why do they initially come to you?
How, I think so. Chef is one of those companies that like we really try to make an insanely good product, right? I think it all comes back to product. If we have an insanely great product, then I think people come to you a little bit because the industry talks to each other, right? People talk to each other in the industry. So a lot of it's inbound, and of course we have our own kind of sales force as well. We kind of reach out to folks, and then in terms of like why they get excited, it's really all about labor, right? And I think like there's different flavors to that. Like some people in some parts of the country can just not hire people. They just don't have people. Some people can hire people. Yeah, they get somebody, right? But then it's a really kind of miserable job, and that person churns. You were talking about 300%. I've seen 700% turnover. Right? It's like people just churn. Literally, like I've seen people like I go to plants and I've seen people quit on the spot because like they're having to like scoop risotto and it's a very dense material. They're just 30 minutes in. They're just like, I don't want to do this. Why am I here? So, you hire people, but then you churn. So you have labor turnover. And then, you have huge recruiting costs. So there's different flavors to like labor, right? And the exact problem they're facing. But It all comes back to something around labor. So that's always kind of why they want chef. Then, what's interesting is the reason they stay, I would say, right? Once you have the robot and it's working, it's like giveaway, and we didn't talk about it, but like human safety, you don't have redundant motions, so you don't have like workers' comp claims, way less spillage, giveaway, all these things kind of like help kind of sustain them, I would say.
You could look at lower insurance costs from that element to think about from that standpoint, let alone the HR, you have lower insurance costs. The customer, let's say I'm Grayson's food packaging plant. I say, oh, Rajat, I want the system. I order it. We sign the contract. How is it installed? What do I need to do? And I ask because when I speak to the individuals in automated warehouses, they have to have a special flooring. They have to have fiber optics and all this stuff. And by the time you get the bill, your jaw drops to the floor initially. What goes into it from your standpoint?
And it's a really good point. So we try to learn from those folks, which is to say, like, a lot of automation that's existed in the world to date, it's extraordinarily complex to install, right? Because you have to retrofit everything. You have to sometimes create new rooms. You have to change the flooring. You have to have all this plumbing in and out, and it's a big deal. And the reason you have to bolt something to the ground, it's a really risky and big deal because it's kind of automating the full process. It's an end-to-end system, like from beginning to end automation process. So that's of course expensive, but it's also risky, by the way. If it doesn't work, like one of our partners is like, they bought this like extremely expensive piece of equipment. It hasn't been used for months because parts of it didn't work. And that's very expensive, right? So we try to learn from that and do something very different, which is the chef module is physically quite small. It's literally the footprint of a person. It's around 6 feet high. It's like 30 inches on each side. And it comes in a wooden crate. You take the wooden crate out of the truck, you unload it, you open up the crate, you slide the robot off, slide the robot onto your floor. Usually they'll do like a little sanitation to clean it off, right? And that's about it. You slide it onto the line, you plug in 110 AC from your kind of sky air and sky power, right? There's like a, drops basically from the ceiling. You plug in compressed air. Every one of our plants has compressed air, pneumatics basically. And you connect to Wi-Fi, and that's the installation. Why is that so simple? It's because, again, we designed it so that it's a human equivalent. It's on wheels. You don't have to bolt it to the ground. You don't have to like fully automate the process. By the way, now just to be clear, if we were to fully automate the line, we probably would have a month-long installation process too, right? Because it's fully automating the process. You got to do every one of those components, right? And if it can't do one of them, then it doesn't work, things like that.
What you built is highly scalable with economics that benefit yourselves, but most importantly, benefit your customers. What was the inspiration for Chef? Did you have an aha moment? Did you see something in the market? What was that inspiration?
I think I was thinking about, okay, like, I was really inspired by, and it's maybe a little bit cliche, but, these founders who have built businesses that have kind of lasted 50 plus years. And some of them are like, not exactly 50 years, but I think you know what I'm talking about, like Microsoft, right? And Amazon and Apple. I mean, these founders, Steve Jobs was working at Apple for like 40 years. And I was really inspired by that because they kind of started at one place and they kind of like evolved with technology and like really kind of did something amazing. And I was like, okay, I want to work on something that I can work on for like 40, 50 years, like really put my like blood, sweat, and tears into this and hopefully make it into something really impactful in the world. But of course, if I'm going to do that, I need it to be really important. Like, I don't want to work on something small. I want to work on something that really can one day have a really big impact. And just to be clear, like those journeys, I mean, we think about how Amazon's changing everything now, but it started off as a bookseller, right? So I was willing to be patient to kind of get to the ultimate goal, but just needed somewhere to start. And so then it was kind of very much practical. Okay, like what is the biggest thing I could potentially work on? And I became very convinced that like AI is kind of the thing I could do. But I was less excited about purely digital AI. Like obviously right now we're seeing the rise of chatbots and LLMs. Obviously that wasn't true when I started Chef. Those didn't exist or publicly exist as much. I mean, they did exist in research. I was very excited about AI in the physical world, right? Because I think that most of the problems we face are in the physical world, right? The biggest problems are in the physical world. 90% of GDP is in the physical world. The software sector is great, but it's nowhere near as big as the labor sector, which is the labor market is $45 trillion of GDP. It's like half of global GDP. So, okay, that's where I want to do something. And then I kind of said, okay, like back to our friends at the BLS, what are the biggest industries I could go after? And I literally, again, very practical, like what are the biggest industries? Okay, the biggest one is kind of nursing aides, personal aides. Felt like that was not tractable today, right? Today, as in 2019 when I started, didn't feel like that was going to happen anytime soon. Then it was like, okay, great. It seems like the next one is retail salespeople. Also, it didn't seem very tractable anytime soon. And there's been some companies that do like inventory management to kind of like walk around your retail store and kind of see how much inventory you have. There's big problems with that, so decided not to do that. The third one is food service, food production, food preparation. It was number 3, but from my perspective, it seemed like the biggest market tractable, right? So that's when I said, okay, let's do something in food. Obviously, I didn't have a food background. I come from like AI robotics background. And then I kind of coming back to the beginning of this conversation, I talked to all these operators and I was like, what's the biggest problem? They all told me labor shortage, and then they told me food assembly. And then we figured out, okay, we can't actually start with fast casual. We've got to start in manufacturing. And that's kind of how this whole journey started. And I think it's been awesome, and I'm excited to be on it.
It's exciting where it's going. It's a growing market. I use the term yummy tummies. We're all going to need food. It's all eventually going to become automated. How do you see automation in the food packaging market growing over the next decade? And what role do you want Chef to play in that?
I think it's inevitable. I think it's necessary, right? I think that, it's interesting, right? So there's a lot of robotics companies, and maybe you've heard or talked to some of them. A lot of them kind of start in restaurants, right? Some of them kind of make their own B2B restaurant, B2C restaurant. They sell to other consumers. I think that's a really tough business personally. You're ultimately in the restaurant space, which is hard, right? So now you're running a robotics company, which is hard as is, and you're running a restaurant, which is even harder probably, right? So I think that's really hard. I think there's been some companies that do B2B for restaurants. Again, we started there. We think that's not the right place to start. It's kind of like building a Model 3 right away. So I think what I would hope to see is more and more companies who are kind of learning from the lessons of old from robotics, right? And saying, okay, well, let's meet robotics where it is. It's not fully there yet. So we got to meet it where it is. Manufacturing is a really great place to start, right? They desperately need something, a solution, and the volume is really high. The mix is relatively low. Product mix is relatively low. It's a really good place to start. And I hope that we'll see a lot more robots and AI-enabled robots in that kind of scenario. And over time, I do hope that we kind of get into more of the service industry, right? We get into ghost kitchens, fast casuals, everything else. And that's not just for us. That's hopefully for the industry. So what role I hope to have at Chef is I kind of think about it as like the 4-minute miler kind of approach, which is like, for forever, nobody thought that you could do a 4-minute mile. And I think that's kind of how I get the sense that that's how a lot of people feel in AI and robotics right now, which is there honestly has not been a breakout winner, right? There's no Apple or Google or Amazon or forget that. There's no Stripe, right? Or like a massive player in robotics as of yet. I think we have, and this is a bold statement, but I think we have all the kind of ingredients necessary to get there. Now, obviously, we're not there today, but I think we have the ingredients necessary to get there if we can execute. If we can get there, then obviously, hopefully, we can have a really big impact on our customers, the world, and the business. But hopefully, more importantly, we can inspire other founders, engineers, entrepreneurs, investors, operators to also do something similar. Hopefully in food, but also more generally in AI and robotics. That's kind of how I think about our goal and vision.
I like that. The restaurant business is a hard business. It truly is. I like your approach of starting on the commercial side. Restaurant business, it has a lot of leakage. And when I don't mean food, I mean money walks out the door. It's pretty amazing. You read these horror stories that restaurant owner operators go through with the labor. And if you look at growing labor shortages across a variety of these industries, whether it's forklift operators, whether it's restaurants, whether it's delivery, it's all going to become automated. Automated is going to play a big role in the future of restaurants. It's going to be a big key pillar, automation in restaurants, in the autonomy economy, because it's going to scale across the whole entire food distribution channel. Rajat, this has been absolutely fascinating. I can't wait to have you back on maybe a year from now to see how much bigger you are, and perhaps you're scaling 2, 3, 4, 5x where you are today. As we look to wrap up for today, what would you like our listeners and viewers to take away with them?
I think there's probably a couple things I would just say. Like, I think there's a lot of excitement around AI. I think that's amazing. I'm really excited about that. And I would encourage and hope that we can get more really smart people to take that kind of excitement in AI and kind of go to embodied AI or physical AI, whatever you want to call it. But basically AI in the physical world. I think the world needs more of that, because again, the majority of the problems of the world are in that market. So I really encourage people to think about that. If you want to change the world, I think it's got to be AI in the physical world. I think that's just a much more exciting and bigger market. The other thing I would say is robotics is not easy. I think it's actually very tough. So if you want to do robotics, you got to be very practical. I think I find a lot of really, really smart engineers, extraordinarily way smarter engineers than me, but I think they just want to build a cool thing. And I think that's that hasn't worked, right? So I think I have really good business chops around, okay, like what's our go-to-market? How do we generate ROI? How do we kind of like offer something useful to get production data and improve over time? So I think kind of bringing some practicality into robotics from the business perspective is going to go a long way. And I hope that with Chef's success, we can inspire other people to think like that as well.
Absolutely. Take the excitement of AI, build something in the real world. Don't fall into the hyper scalar trap. The economics don't add up. Applying the economics of AI to the physical world will build great businesses. If you put business acumen, you solve a problem, what Chef is solving. for a growing labor shortage. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is chef. Rajat, thank you so much for coming on the road to autonomy today.
Yeah, thank you, Grayson. This is fun.